Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Friday the 16th of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway. SolarWinds has put out an advisory. There is a critical remote code execution bug requiring urgent patch. It is a bug in the Web Help Desk platform, Tractor's CV 2024-28986. It's a Java deserialization remote code execution flaw. And if unpatched, it allows the attacker to run commands on the host machine. If the vulnerability is exploited, obviously. Excuse me again. SolarWinds are recommending that you upgrade to Help Desk version 12.8.3 and then apply the hotfix. This particular vulnerability has been given a score of 9.8, so it is quite critical. Strong recommendation that if you're using SolarWinds Web Help Desk, the Web Help Desk platform, that you look at this ASAP and apply the patches as soon as you possibly can. There is a vulnerability in Microsoft's Entra ID, which allows for authentication bypass in hybrid environments. So, oh dear, it's one of those mornings. Right, the concept here is PTA. The PTA agent is a pass-through authentication agent, and this then is part of an environment where Azure AD and on-prem AD are integrated with each other. Okay. The PTA pass-through authentication agent is the component that allows for on-prem authentication to be handled by Azure Active Directory. So Microsoft Entra ID, was formerly known, I think, as Azure Active Directory, or the Azure Active Directory credentials. And it effectively is the glue between the cloud AD and the on-prem AD. The vulnerability, as is described here, the vulnerability allows the PTA agent to be subverted and allows the attacker to log in as any synced AD user without knowing their actual password. So caveats to this are you do need to have a admin level account on the compromised device. However, that's only a very partial mitigation, because one of the things that we know and have known for a very long time is that once an environment's been compromised, one of the things that attackers will do is look to find ways to gain access to administrative level accounts, either through privilege escalation or simply through using internal access, be that internal cloud or internal on-prem, doesn't really matter, internal access to get to socially engineer their way to get access to an administrator's account. This is interesting. There is no fix for this at the moment. Microsoft are looking into it, but Microsoft consider it to be only medium severity, based around the fact that you need local admin access in order to exploit it. Well, yeah, okay, that's all well and good. The mitigations at the moment. Well, firstly, they say the architecture for this is based on the assumption that you treat the PTA as a what they call a tier 0 component, which is basically, we mentioned earlier this week, when you're thinking about how you put all your stuff together, well, having a management VLAN, which we talked about earlier, which is where you put the interfaces that can be used to manage things. You should also then consider having a VLAN for components that require specific elevated protection. And your PTA should be in that environment, i.e. it should be very difficult to get anywhere near it. So if your architecture, though, doesn't do that, and let's be honest, over the last 10 years or so, we've seen a huge trend towards what's called flattening the network in order to make things faster, easier, and more efficient. And faster, easier, and more efficient to compromise. Yes. Didn't win that argument in some organisations in the past, but never mind. So yeah, you should be protecting your PTA, and also any accounts which are synced between an Azure AD, an Entra ID account, and an on-prem AD really should have multi-factor authentication implemented, because that would be at least a partial mitigation to this particular risk. So if you are using hybrid on-prem and Azure AD using Microsoft's Entra ID systems in order to coordinate all of that, be aware of this. Good article in Dark Reading, links out to more details in other articles as well. So take a read of that and act on it. And then finally from me today, there is an article in Security Affairs that talks about a cybercrime group that's linked to Ransom Hub ransomware, using a new tool to disable EDR software. Now, why is this interesting? Well, EDR software is still seen as being the solution to most security problems, or still a lot of, despite this being 2024, we are still coming across a lot of organizations where very senior people in the organization look at security and go, well, it's all right, we're running EDR, we're fine, we don't need anything else. Well, EDR is your last layer of defense. Okay, and it's not a particularly strong one, despite what the EDR vendors like to tell you. And it's not particularly strong for this particular reason. Okay, it runs solely on the device, which you have to assume maybe access to this may be compromised in other ways. So it may not be that there's a vulnerability specifically that's been exploited, or something that EDR software would flag up and do something about. It may well be that credential stealing, whatever it is given somebody access to the device. Once you've got access to the device, if you're able to elevate privileges in any way whatsoever, it is then possible to turn off EDR, and we've seen this done. We've seen this done many times. This is a particular vulnerability. This exploits a vulnerability in the way that endpoint devices work. This particular piece of malware, if it can't execute, then downloads so because things are multi-stage, multi-tiered, multi-staged. Um, Malware these days. It's very rare that a single, it's a monolithic piece of malware. So if it can't run its final, the final exploit, the final compromise, will then download a piece of software which then pulls in other pieces of code that download vulnerable versions of legitimate DLLs. Okay. Now, this whole thing about DLL sideloading is very interesting. It is not easy to detect if the only layer of defense you've got is the endpoint itself. It's theoretically, conceptually quite simple to do. You're basically rolling back, effectively doing the equivalent of rolling back a patch. Once you have a vulnerable, in fact, it doesn't even need to be on Windows. It would work for Linux, Mac OS, iOS X, anything, Android, you name it. So it doesn't have to be a DLL, it just has to be a component. So you basically sideload a vulnerable component once you've got the vulnerability. Of course, you know what vulnerability you've just introduced to that device, so you know that your automated methods of using things like privilege escalation through that vulnerability will work. So you then exploit that. Once you've gained elevated privileges, you turn off, or even more cleverly, you adjust the rules for endpoint protection to allow you to execute whatever it was that your original exploit was going to be without flagging anything up. So it's kind of multi-staged, as in it needs, you need to have an initial exploit of the device in some way or another, even if that's just exploit of known credentials to get some method of getting access to the thing. Then these sorts of tools get seen. So where are we going with all of this? Well, be aware of the fact that this stuff goes on. Definitely think carefully around multi-layered defense. Don't rely only on EDR. Make sure that you've got good visibility. Even if you're concerned about how robust EDR is off the back of thinking this stuff through, don't rely solely on that one component to protect your environment. A very simple thing you can do is give yourself visibility across the board with these things. Get stuff off the endpoint, get logs off the endpoint and into some form of centralized security visibility. I'm resisting calling it SIEM because that has got so many bad connotations these days, even though we offer a service called SIEM. It's really about security visibility, not worrying too much about the nomenclature of these things. Get some visibility on this stuff, because you would be able to see, for example, through that, when endpoint detection processes are stopped or started. You could look to see when new software. You should be able to get alerts when new software is installed, or when components are changed, or whenever it is. There's a whole raft of things that are very, very, very simple to do that will give you visibility on this sort of activity, even if your EDR hasn't spotted it. You can also do things like using simple agents that would run vulnerability, is a passive-based vulnerability checking, CVE version checks. So you would potentially be able to pick up the fact that a component has been downgraded through that. So there's loads of things you can do in the visibility space that will help you with this. But also consider the fact that initial compromise will probably require access to an account somehow. So make sure that you're on top of all of those sorts of things, including multi-factor authentication. as well. So, interesting article, definitely worth having a read, because understanding how this stuff works in advance of being hit by it. Because if you hit you know if you do get compromised, this is the sort of stuff that you do need to be very much on top of very quickly. So yeah, that is all from me for today. I hope you have a good Friday, and I will speak to you all